Toyota has given much to the world in their devotion to automotive engineering, but few items have made as big of an impact as the JZ engine platform. Today, let's dive into the Japanese inline-six world and see what's so special about the Toyota 2JZ. Okay, so let's start with the least known fact about Toyota that actually surprised me when we were doing the research for this video. The company started its life as Toyota Automatic Loom Works. So they were actually manufacturing looms and sewing machines for the textile industry. The part of the business is still running to this day. The automotive part, the one that we're interested in, didn't really kick off until the early 1930s. Toyota, spelled with a D, as it was named after its founder, Sakachi Toyoda, released its first domestic vehicle, the Model A1, in 1933. The company changed its name to Toyota with a T in 1936. Now, there's a bunch of theories as to why that might have happened, but the most commonly cited one is that in Japanese, D is a voiceless consonant, which apparently is not very pleasing to the ear. So it was changed to a T, which according to the experts sounds stronger and more pronounced. Moving right along, in 1956, Toyota began selling vehicles and their first export vehicle through their newly established worldwide dealer chain. The car was the Toyota Crown. Since then, Toyota has grown in size and reach, surpassing GM in 2008 to become the world's largest car manufacturer, a title it still holds to this day. All right, so that's a bit of Toyota history. Let's now turn our attention to the subject of today's video and arguably Toyota's best ever engine, the mighty 2JZ. But before we get all nitty-gritty about this famous inline-six, we really should quickly talk about the hero car it powered, the Toyota Supra. So let's step back in time again to the 1970s. Toyota's direct competitor, Nissan, was seeing major success with its Z platform. Toyota's own sports car, the 2000 GT, had been popular, but due to its limited production, it didn't really return a profit. Needing to pivot quickly, the Toyota engineers stretched their existing Celica platform by nearly 130mm and elongated the engine bay to house the M Series inline-six. Dubbed the Celica Supra, Latin for go beyond, these would be the first of 5 generations of the Toyota Supra. The M Series went on to power 3 generations of Supra, but by the late 80s it was getting a bit long in the tooth, so Toyota devoted its efforts into developing the new inline-six platform. The new motor was a 24-valve dual overhead camshaft dubbed the 1JZ. It was first used in 1990 in the Supra Mark III and the Crown. While it was adequate, Toyota quickly saw a need for a larger displacement JZ engine, and with reliability in mind, they created a new, taller 3-litre design. The 2JZ that went into the 1991 Aristo was a tall-deck JZ engine that featured a shared bore and stroke, making the engine squared. Now this means that it's got 86mm of stroke and it's got an 86mm bore. They call that a square engine. 2 versions of the 2JZ were made, the naturally aspirated 2JZ-GE and the more popular twin turbocharged 2JZ-GTE. The latter, twin turbo version, finally gave Toyota an engine that could take on Nissan's RB26 head on. 2JZ? No shit. Now here's where things get a little odd for the 2JZ. Production variants of the 4th generation Supra were made with both the turbo and the non-turbo variants, but Toyota never officially campaigned a 2J in any form of motorsport. Well, why? Toyota invested a considerable amount of time, money and resources developing an engine for their WRC effort. And since the Japanese touring car rules allowed any production engine to be used in their cars, Toyota opted to power their JTC Supras with their 3S GT power plant used in their really successful WRC Celicas. Remember the Tom's Supra that was immortalised in Gran Turismo? Yep, never had a 2JZ. Or what about the HKS Drag Supra? Well, the Mark III ran a 7M, and the Mark IV used a UZ-based V8. It wasn't until a few years into the Mark IV Supra production run that privateers began campaigning and developing the 2JZ platform. Notably, the Blitz tuning Supra tackled the Nürburgring modified production car record and claimed the title in 1997 with their impressive 7-minute 49-second run. But no one could have expected that a street racing film from America would make the Mark IV Supra and the 2JZ one of the most popular engines in the world.
Pop the hood.
It's a bonnet,
Lift the
dickhead.
bloody bonnet.
Jokes aside, this film and the explosion of drifting as a motorsport helped grow the market into what we know today. The 2JZ, as mentioned, came in two variants. The naturally aspirated GE powered the Mark IV Supra, Aristo, Crown, Chaser, and Sora, respectively. In 1997, they upgraded to the variable valve timing setup, and they remained that way throughout till the end of production. The GTE model was a direct competitor to the popular Nissan RB26 DE-TT from the Godzilla Skyline. But in this, the block, the crankshafts and the connecting rods are shared with the GE. However, a new aluminium high-flow cylinder head was developed alongside new, larger valves and higher duration camshafts. The biggest difference, aside from the cylinder head, are the oil spray nozzles installed under the pistons in order to help pull temperature out of that piston and help with lubrication. This and the shorter piston to lower compression ratio makes them a much more desirable option for the average enthusiast. Again, like the GE, variable valve timing was added in 1997. One of the most important changes to note is the conrods in the GE VVTi engine compared to all of the others. The GE VVTi engine has the weaker conrod capable of around 500 horsepower at the wheels compared to the rods in all the other variants of the GTE engine and the GE non-VVTi engine that are capable of about 1,000 horsepower at the wheels with an unopened engine. So that means if you're looking for one of those bulletproof engines, stay away from the variants that came from the IS300 or the aspirated 2JZ VVTi Sora. While the 3-litre inline makes respectable power in stock form, many owners seek out more power by replacing the factory turbocharging setup. Remember that that's a primary and secondary style turbo system, they don't work at the same time. Ditching the restrictive factory exhaust manifold and turbocharger setup, usually in favour of a big single, can easily bump up the power output. Whether or not you choose to try and modify your stock ECU is up to you, but considering we've been in the engine management game for nearly 40 years now, we'd recommend ditching that old archaic system and heading to something a little bit more high-tech. If you're in the market for a used engine, be warned that finding them will only get harder as time goes on, and that means you're going to hate what I'm about to do to this engine. Being out of production for over 15 years means that finding a wrecker with a good used piece will be difficult. That said, these engines are known to be dependable, and other than normal signs of wear and tear, there's nothing that you'd really be looking at that'd make you skip out on buying one if you did find it. The valve guide seals are known to fail pretty early on. Look out for smoke out of the exhaust on startup, and that's a good indicator that the valve stem seals might need replacing. If you're considering the VVTi model, look out for sludge in the valve covers. This will be especially bad if the VVTi cam gear is leaking. Another potential issue is sludge or oil debris clogging the VVTi solenoid's filter screen that's located right here. We'll get to that in a little bit. All in all, these 2JZ engines, if pulled from a wrecker with a good service history, should be a great option to swap into your project car. Now, before we strip this thing down and have a look at what makes it tick, this is the third inline six that I'm about to tear down in the What's So Special About series. So we've done the RB, I've done the Barra, and now the 2J. For me, I'm into the 2J part of it, and it's not that I don't like the other ones. Obviously, I love the Ford Barra. Big 4-litre capacity. As a factory engine, it makes heaps of power. Unfortunately, its downside is it's physically a very, very big motor, meaning that it is a little bit tricky to shoehorn a Barra into a smaller style car or smaller engine bay. So that makes that a little bit difficult. The mighty RB26, Obviously have plenty of love for that thing as well. However, being the 2.6 litre 6-cylinder, the thing doesn't have quite as much torque down low, which makes drivability not as great as sort of what I would want from an everyday driver, racer, street car style thing. The 3 litre 2JZ with the variable cam control, this thing's got huge potential to make excellent horsepower, but is also a really, really drivable engine, and it does fit in a heap of the cool cars, which is why I think that the 2JZ, it is the great all-rounder. It really is an excellent engine. Now, the only 2JZ I could get my hands on is the one I just told you that is the one not to get, the one with the small conrods. What we're gonna do, we'll wander around. I'm just gonna start stripping as much as I can, putting them in that box, and we'll see what's inside the 2J. Now, this is one of the things I was talking about before about the coil packs. So some of the engines, the turbocharged setups, had 6 individual coils. This VVTi engine has a wasted spark ignition system. And what that means, I'm just gonna pull out here the coil that's mounted as a direct fire style coil over cylinder 6, geez, it's seen better days. And then it's got a plug lead that goes to cylinder 1. So what's happening there, oh geez, that one's horrible as well. So what's happened there is we fire that coil twice per engine cycle or twice per cam revolution. So it's firing on the cylinder that needs that spark, but it's also firing a wasted spark on the opposing cylinder. This way, manufacturers can have one coil and one plug lead. Probably reduces costs a little bit, but that's known as wasted spark. This engine, Mitsubishi Evos, also run a wasted spark style system with one coil and one plug lead as well. Now that we've stripped the front covers or the timing covers off the engine, we can see our 2 camshafts up the top. We can see our cam belt. So unlike the Barra and like the RB, the 2J uses a timing belt. It's got our 2 cam gears up the top that are the 2 big ones. We've got our tensioner, which is a hydraulic tensioner here for that belt. Then we've got our crank pulley down the bottom. Remembering as well, this is one of the things that everyone always forgets about, that this is a 4-stroke engine. So that means that the crankshaft is spinning twice to the camshafts once, resulting in a full engine cycle. So now that we've got some of the pretty covers off, we're down to the business end. We've got the camshafts up the top here. This is a JDM, or Japanese domestic market, or Australian domestic engine. The USDM, American engines. Interestingly, the exhaust camshaft is the same in that engine, whereas the intake camshaft of the American engine is actually a bigger profile. So it has more lift and is claimed to make sort of 5, 8, 10 horsepower more than the JDM version. Because this is a VVTi engine, it's got a crank trigger down the bottom here that's got 36 teeth and 2 missing. So we call that a missing tooth, or a Motronic style of trigger system. So 36 minus 2 on the crankshaft. Up the top here, we've got 3 teeth on the camshaft spaced 120 degrees apart. That's known as the Toyota VVTi style of trigger system. It's not just found in the 2JZ VVTi. A lot of the 4-cylinder series, a lot of the V8s, like the Mighty 1UZ, also has the same style of trigger system. So commonly manufacturers will share the trigger type they have, and that's suited to the engine management system that engine manufacturer uses. Because this has got our 36 teeth down the bottom and the 3 teeth up the top, The 3 teeth give us enough information to phase exactly where that camshaft is relative to the crankshaft, and that helps us to do our variable cam control. So what's going on up here, if I twist this a little bit, what we're going to see is that I'm actually moving that cam gear independent of the camshaft. And the reason for that is this solenoid here. It's a 2-pin solenoid that the engine management system controls. So it puts a pulse into this solenoid. This solenoid will either be opening, closing, or holding the pressure that's within that solenoid. And its job is to either advance the intake camshaft in order to give us better low-end torque, but reducing top-end power, or it's going to be retarding the camshaft, giving us better top-end power, but losing the bottom end. In the case of the 2JZ, when we pulse that solenoid, it's going to do nothing because there's a little filter in here that gets clogged all the time, resulting in bad VVT control. If you've got one of these engines in your car at home and you think that might be an issue, I'll be able to show you how to pull that out and clean it. If I pull out this bolt, it's known as a banjo bolt. This is the same style of bolt that you might use in like your turbo coolant line, stuff like that. It's a really clever thing. So what it is, it looks like a normal bolt, but it's got a hole in the middle of it. If I just pull the back side here, there's a washer, normally a copper washer on either side. So there it is. That's the copper washer from one side. That's the one from the other. That sits in there. When that tightens up, it sits around this bit here. It seals, and then oil can actually go through that bolt then into whatever line it's connected to. So a really clever way of moving that fluid. So this thing here is our electronic cam solenoid, and the thing that I've been speaking about where the engine management system pulses here, that electrifies the solenoid in the middle here, in turn moving this piston up and down in the bottom bit here, which determines where the oil goes in order to move that inlet camshaft around. So the way that that system works is if the engine management system pulls that duty cycle down, for example, oil will start flowing out of the solenoid and it'll retard the camshaft. If the engine management system starts bringing the duty cycle up, it's going to let oil in and it's going to advance the camshaft. There is also what we call a steady state duty cycle. On this engine, on this setup, it'll be about 42%, give or take at around 120 Hertz. That's the position that the solenoid sits at. So 42% duty cycle, that's the lock position. So if that solenoid is sitting at 42%, that means that the camshaft has found its target position and it'll get locked there until it gets instructions from the engine management system to move again. Now keep in mind that's happening really, really quickly. Your tuner is normally mapping that across a 3D table of engine load versus engine RPM, maybe the coolant temperature as well, because the engine oil does need to get up to temperature before these things work effectively. So it is a very, very high-tech thing. Even though it's a very simple solenoid, it is doing a heap of work inside the engine. Part off. So what is actually happening here, I'll just wipe all this oil out. The first thing you'll notice is that these dents on the outside of the camshaft have got a little section missing here. Likewise on the camshaft, if I pull this gear out so you can see it, there's a missing set of teeth there as well, and a seal. Sometimes these seals leak, that's another thing with the VVTi engines, but that's how you locate it to put things back together. And what's happening inside here is that we're either filling this void with oil or releasing that oil in order to advance or retard that inlet camshaft. Where we're up to here is a really, really impressive piece of engineering. The manufacturers needed to get oil into the front of this cam gear in order to change the inlet cam timing. But you can't exactly just put a braided line or a hard line or something to the cam gear because the thing's spinning, right? So the way that they do it is we've got engine oil at engine oil pressure. Let's say it's 20, 30 PSI when it's hot at idle. Let's say it's 80, 90, 100 PSI when it's hot at redline. That oil pressure comes up, it's filtered obviously, it goes through one of these galleries at the top here which is sealed into the nose of the camshaft, then it travels through the middle of the camshaft over to this side, so outside of the camshaft and outside of the rocker covers, then comes out of this gallery here through an oil seal, like an O-ring, so that's spinning so no oil comes out, then gets fed through the cam gear, comes back out through one of these holes and fills up. When we need to release it, likewise, there's a second gallery that comes back. It's really, really impressive. Every now and then they do have VVT oil leaks, and in that case, probably not a bad idea to do your timing belt at the same time, pull the gear apart, put new seals in it, put it back together, and she's away. There she is, one ginormous, heavy, thick, reliable camshaft, 2JZ. The other side, exhaust side, same sort of construction. She's an absolute monster, and there's a fair bit of weight to that. That is a reliable, solid thing. Now that the cylinder head's off, we've found the head gasket. So not so much 2JZ specific. Every engine's got a head gasket, but if you haven't seen this before, it's an interesting thing. So when they talk about you've got a blown head gasket, so probably you Subaru guys, this is the head gasket. What's happening here? Think of it like a sealing surface between the engine block and the cylinder head. When it blows, what that means is that we've either got oil and water mixing within the head gasket surface here, so that's when you get the milk, or you get the the oil in the radiator, or you get the milky oil in the engine because you've got coolant inside it, or it's the compression area here. So the seal around the actual cylinder pressure that's gone, and then that means that when we get a combustion event, it'll push that compression. So instead of pushing this piston back down, it might bleed into the cooling system and it pressurizes your cooling system, which is probably the most common thing. That's when you get that funny smell in your radiator. Might pop a radiator hose, it might blow the top off your radiator, but that's the head gasket. That's what it does. It seals your coolant from your oil and your compression from the block to the cylinder head. It's pretty hard to get to. You can see how much work would go into it to replace this in the car. That's why doing a head gasket in the car is an expensive job, as it's probably the hardest gasket in the whole engine to get to. We've now got our cylinder head on display. We've got our camshafts. The camshafts are made of a cast steel, and because this engine is the 2JZ VVTi model that was the non-turbo variant, these camshafts have got a 233 degree intake camshaft. It's got a 226 degree exhaust camshaft. The lift about the intake 8.25. The exhaust is about 8.41 millimeters of lift. What's really nice about the 2JZ is the way that the camshafts actuate the valves. Instead of having rocker arms, instead of having a bucket with a hydraulic adjuster, these things are solid bucket and shim. So what that means is that normally the camshafts are up here, spinning around. We've got the cam lobes, these bits here, so that's got the profile of the camshaft, so when the valve opens and when the valve closes. That lobe runs on the tops of all of these buckets. It's got 4 valves per cylinder, so that means that it's got 2 intake valves and 2 exhaust valves. But what I want to show you is how this solid lifter arrangement works. In other styles of engines that have got like a rocker arm, for example, you might have a rocker arm that's got a hydraulic adjuster in it. So that means that it adjusts, it takes up the slack between the camshaft lobe and the top of the valve, for example. Whereas in these ones, they're solid. You can get these in 2 styles. They could be hydraulic in another style of engine, meaning that engine oil gets in there and it adjusts itself, so that adjusts your clearances. Whereas in this case, they're a solid lifter. So let me try and just pop one of these out. I've just got a magnet here. Okay, so that's our solid, what we'll call our bucket and shim arrangement. We've got the valve, the top of the valve here. We've got our collets and our retainer, so that's what's holding the valve spring in down here. This bucket and shim arrangement sits on top. The camshaft rides directly on top there, and then watch this. This is the shim. If I can just pop that out, there we go. So, the tedious job of arranging all of the shims, so your engine builder will have a whole bunch of different sized shims that they'll assemble together. They'll gently sit in there. They just sit in there. They use the oil to kind of, it's not a compression fit, but it's a super tight clearance fit. They can spin around in there. That'll sit back down. Then, once the camshaft goes back in, we can measure those clearances there and make sure they're all within tolerance. With the cylinder head flipped over, we can see that we've got our intake valves, we've got our exhaust valves here. There's plenty of meat between the cylinders, and there's a heap of water jackets in this cylinder head, giving the engine really, really good cooling, meaning that, especially on the VVTi engine, they could increase the compression ratio a little bit. If you haven't seen an engine like this before, I've got a screwdriver here. This is the actual combustion chamber in here. I'm just going to pop the screwdriver straight through the middle here just so you can see. When you're replacing your spark plugs, that there is where your spark plug tip would sit and produce that spark. That's where we've got our air and fuel mixture, which makes that controlled combustion, which turns into power. Another lovely thing about the Toyota 2JZ engine is that you don't need to heavily port the cylinder head to make huge power. Obviously, if you do port it, that is going to allow it to flow more air, in turn making more power. But for a high-powered street car, often a factory cylinder head is all you need. When we have a look down here, we can see our inlet valves. It's a real straight shot, straight down there. We've got a little relief in the tops here of all of the intake ports, and that's where the fuel injector sits and sprays in. And on this old, poor example of a 2J that we're stripping down, you can actually see where the petrol has been keeping that inlet clean there. Around the outsides of it all, it's all black and tarred up and all a bit gross. So this engine was probably ready for a strip down anyway. Another thing that's nice to have a look at here is the match porting. So when you hear someone talk about match porting, when the inlet manifold goes on here, you can actually see that it's been covering a part of the cylinder head, so that if we were to get a die grinder and open up that inlet port in order to get rid of all that shape, we might end up getting rid of a little bit of turbulence, a little bit of disturbance on the air intake track, and that might be worth a little bit of horsepower and a little bit of torque. On this side of the casting, there's not that much here. We've got the 6 exhaust ports, we've got the really nice coolant galleries along the top that keeps that cylinder head nice and cool, which helps us to make power. The studs the exhaust manifold on are a whole lot nicer than the Nissan because they've actually got the hex style stud on the top, meaning that if we do want to pull them out, we simply put the socket over the top and wind them out. Nice and simple. Once the engine's flipped over, we can have a look at the front sump here. It's got the oil drain on the side, pretty straightforward. But what I wanted to show you was this back section here that acts as almost like a girdle across the bottom of the engine. It's got a whole bunch of 10 mils to pull the sump assembly off, but then we've got a whole bunch of that helps to strengthen the block and tie all that back end together. Now, before I pull the oil pump on this thing, and I don't mean to keep coming back and comparing between the RB and the 2J, but it's hard not to. We know that the RB's got a problem with the oil pump where the crankshaft has got 2 flat surfaces that drive the pump, whereas when we pull this thing apart, have a look at this. So, oil pump off, we've got a geared drive on the front here of the crankshaft, so that's direct off the crankshaft, or that's the nose of the crank. Here's our oil pump. And look at that, a whole bunch of gears. So what's happening when we're revving this thing, it's loading that oil pump across every single one of those teeth, rather than just the two surfaces like the RB that eventually get a bit of wear in them, get a bit of slap back and forward, and that's where they smash gears. This style of gear-driven pump is one of the upgrades that we would do on a Nissan RB engine. I promise we're getting close to the crank and the rods, but while we're in the back here, I took the ring gear off before. So this is the bit that the starter motor engages to start the engine. It's also in this automatic equipped engine. This is where the torque converter would have bolted to. Then the gearbox would have come across the back there. Get rid of that bit. Then, the reason why I wanted to point this part out, we pulled this bit off. This here is the carrier for the rear main seal. So there's a seal in here that runs directly on the crankshaft. This one's actually seen better days as well. But you might have heard people say, oh, I've got an oil leak from somewhere between the engine and the gearbox, and the mechanic will tell you, oh yeah, it's the rear main, and that's when you have to pull the gearbox off, pull this apart, pop this seal out, and then replace that part. Again, a tiny little seal, it's probably only worth 20 or 30 bucks, but a huge amount of labor to get to. And you know we're getting to the very, very bottom of it when the piston and the conrod come out. So that's it. The first thing we'll point out is this cute, teeny, tiny little conrod. Not quite what you'd expect out of a 2J, right? And that's because we've got the GS300 variant, the one with the skinny conrod that's only capable of, say 500 horsepower, but even that might even be a stretch, to be honest. If we pulled apart one of the turbo variants or one of the ones that we mentioned as the ones that have the larger conrod that support around 1,000 horsepower unopened, or stock bottom end we call it, it'll have a lot thicker conrod than this tiny little thing. Don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure that this is actually what the Toyota V12 conrod looks like as well. Super skinny, something that doesn't hold a whole lot of power. Up the top here, we've got 2 compression rings, then we've got the oil control ring, got nice skirt on the side of it, quite a big gudgeon pin. So the gudgeon pin is the bit in here, the steel pin that's joining that conrod to that piston. The piston is a simple aluminium casting, and it's got some reliefs for the valves up the top here. On the bottom side, if we just pop that back together, it's got some locating pins so that you know which way around things connect. That's where the bolts go through to hold that bottom together. And the crankshaft is normally sitting in there. The bearing and the width of the crankshaft here gives us a heap of area, and that means that the more oil, the more pressure we have here between the crankshaft and the bearing, the less work everything is actually doing. So having that nice thick surface there is a really good part of this engine build, and one of the reasons why these bottom ends stay together. These are the last bolts in the engine. These are the mains. So these are the ones that are holding the center line of the crankshaft in. So we'll pull these out. These have also got bearings in them. The bearings actually look pretty good. 1, 2, 3, and fourth one, the center has a different bearing to the others. So I'll pull this out, have a look here. So we've got a bearing in the middle, which looks really good, but we've also got these things. So this here, I'll pop that out the other side as well. This is known as the thrust bearing. So what's happening here is that these are sitting on either side of that main cap, and they're stopping the crankshaft from wandering in this direction, back and forward. So if you've got, when you press the clutch, for example, when you're sitting at the lights with your foot on the clutch, you're actually putting load on the crankshaft and pushing it forward, and that is loading these, the center bearing or thrust bearing we'll call it. This is also the position where on some other styles of engines, you would machine out and put, they call a Torrington bearing, which is more of a needle style bearing. depending if you've got a torque converter set up, a huge automatic transmission setup that puts a huge amount of pressure and a huge amount of thrust on the crankshaft, going to a Torrington style bearing in the middle might be an option for you. In order to determine whether you've got worn centre bearing or a worn thrust bearing, we can typically put a measuring tool across the nose of the crankshaft here. We then push the crank in and out, or we can push the clutch in and out depending on what setup you're at, and you'll see how far the crankshaft is moving, and there is an allowable tolerance there. The tool on the front, use something like a dial indicator for that. And there's no bolts left, so the crankshaft, that is a solid, heavy unit, and that's the reason why a crankshaft like this can run 220 mile an hour, it can make 2,000 horsepower in any of these Pro Mod cars. This is a serious bit of gear and something that is very desirable for the 2J community. A 2JZ crankshaft. So what's so special about the 2JZ? Well, for me, it's the crankshaft, it's the oiling system, it's the huge journals, it's the awesome oil pump at the front, it's the girdle that holds the bottom end together, it's the lovely solid bucket cylinder head. This is a great engine. It's special because it can make 1,000 horsepower, well, not with those rods, with the good ones, from a stock bottom end engine. It can make 2,000 horsepower, 3,000 horsepower when you put obviously all of the Pro Mod style stuff into it, but the cast block does handle it exceptionally well. It's special because it's got a whole bunch of factory functions that we're now using and retrofitting into other engines. The 2JZ is a special thing. We're taking a closer look at one of the most influential engines to ever come out of Japan, Nissan's infamous RB. The RB story really started to gain momentum with the Nissan Skyline R32 GTR. This car's been spoken about with near mythical reverence ever since the R32 took the Japanese automotive market by storm when it was launched in August of 1989. After 16 years without a GTR model, Nissan relaunched the Skyline GTR as a showcase for what was at the time the pinnacle of their performance technology. The R32 GTR features a multi-link suspension system, high-CAS all-wheel steering, and Nissan's Atessa all-wheel drive system. But the clear highlight was the heart of the beast, the RB26 DE-TT. 2.6 litre, 6-cylinder inline engine. Off the showroom floor, 276 horsepower and about 260 foot-pounds of torque. 0 to 60 mile an hour took 5.6 seconds, and they ran the quarter mile in around 13.9 seconds, which was pretty quick at the time. Legend has it that Nissan's chief engineer, Shuri Ito, didn't reveal to anyone, including his own team members, that this car would actually wear the GTR badge until it was debuted. The R32 race cars had great success in the FIA's Group A series, both at home in Japan, where the blue Calsonic sponsored examples become a motoring icon, where in Australia, the Aussie press nicknamed the fire-breathing monsters Godzilla, when they dominated the local Ford and Holden V8s. And with that, the legend was born. Next came the R33. It was an evolution of the R32 model, and it was first displayed at the 1993 Tokyo Motor Show. But it wasn't officially launched until January of 1995. Still powered by the RB26, the R33 raced at Le Mans in the same year, finishing the grueling event 10th overall and 5th in its class. So while the R33 is often mocked for its rounded sort of boat-like appearance, it certainly doesn't perform like one. The R33 has gained a strong and loyal following of its own, in particular the limited edition Nismo 400R variant. Now, that thing's got 400 horsepower and less than 50 of them were ever produced, so it's certainly a rare beast. Next came the R34, which would turn out to be the last GTR powered by the RB26 DE-TT. While horsepower was officially rated at 280 brake horsepower, it would appear the car was more powerful than Nissan actually advertised, with some examples making closer to about 330 horsepower. The R34 made a formidable race car, with the Pennzoil Nismo GTR winning the Japanese Grand Touring Championship in 1999. The R34 clearly benefited from the racing and testing done with the two previous generations of GTR. Still had the same advertised power, but turbo lag was reduced, it made more torque, and it had that beautiful new 6-speed manual transmission, which replaced the earlier series ones that had the 5-speed. The body was also stiffer, the aerodynamics were improved, and several weight-saving measures were employed. So things like the use of a carbon fibre rear diffuser it's pretty amazing. The car was also shorter, as was the front overhang. The R34 GTR was also featured in several of the Fast and the Furious movies, so that really gave the American car enthusiasts a taste for this unobtainable Japanese Godzilla. Much of the Skyline range from the R31 to R34 in both coupe and four-door body shapes, whether rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, also benefited from the RB engine. As did a lot of the not-so-well-known Nissans like the Stagias, Laurels, Ceferos, and even the odd Nissan Patrol. Of course, I can't talk about RBs without mentioning the Holden VL Commodore. Holden's answer to Australia's stricter emission laws in the late 80s was to fit an RB30. The VL, powered by the single cam variant, which in turbo form made about 200 horsepower, gave it more grunt than the locally manufactured Holden V8 of the same era. This made the VL Turbo a favourite of both the police, highway patrol and car enthusiasts alike. So that's a bit of history in the RB series. So let's have a look at this one that I got in front of me here and see what makes it so special. When we take a look at the Nissan RB26, the first thing that we notice is the intake manifold. So air comes from the twin turbo system through a nice large front mounted intercooler found on the 32, 33 and the 34 models, up through here, but there's no throttle body at the front here. It's got 6 individual throttles mounted right next to the cylinder head here. So as we crack the throttle, we'll get a nice close up of this and we can see each throttle, a good size throttle opening in there. So the first thing is it's got plenty of space for air to get through here. It's got 6 sequential injectors, so each injector fires individually from the factory. It's got direct fire ignition, so 1 coil per cylinder. Twin cam, so 1 cam for the inlet valves, 1 camshaft for the exhaust valves, and it's got 4 valves per cylinder, so 2 intake valves and 2 exhaust valves. While we're on this side of the engine, one of the things to have a good look at on the RB26 or the 4-wheel drive variants of the RB is the integrated front diff, which you'll find at the engine's oil sump. So it's mounted on the side here. There's a whole bunch of through bolts to the actual casting of the block. So the thing is on really, really strong. It's a super strong setup. It's got our drive shafts that go out to the front wheels, and then it's got the input from the prop shaft that comes from the center diff, which is located on the gearbox, which is normally hanging off the back of the engine. Now, the first thing that people normally do with their RB series engine is upgrade the factory turbochargers. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether twin turbo or single turbo is the right way to go. With the late model turbocharger technology now, so with billet wheels, everything getting lighter, everything spooling a whole lot earlier, my personal preference is a big single turbocharger on these that still make a huge amount of power, but you don't quite have the complexity over on the exhaust side of the engine, where when you're working with twin turbos on these things, working on the rear turbocharger is a real chore of a job. So if you can put a nice single on it that's going to support the power that you're after, it is 100% the right way to go. Now, once you've got your right size turbo on this thing, it's making the right power, rods, pistons, always a good thing to do. Head studs, you might want to fit camshafts. So all of these things are going to support the power that you want to make or help it to live as long as possible. One of the things with the GTR engine, or one of the Achilles heel, is the oil pump. Now, I don't know what they were thinking when they designed the oil pump for the mighty GTR engine. Some people say the accountants designed it and that was the last thing where they scrimped and saved. But the oil pumps on these things are definitely a time bomb. So you could just be giving it a hit at the racetrack, you'd be cruising it to the shop, you could just start it in your driveway, all of a sudden you hear that horrible bottom end knock and you know that your GTR oil pump has just fallen apart. Replacement oil pump gears are available, and nowadays they're all billet, so they're a whole lot stronger. A lot of the later oil pumps were actually wider in the drive, so that also avoids that shattering that you just don't want to see on your RB engine. Now, while it's all well and good for me to sit here and tell you all about what I know about RB engines or what turbocharger combination I'd prefer, I thought it might be best to bring in one of my mates who's dealt with plenty of RB series engines in his time. So I've invited Andrew Hawkins from Motive DVD to come in, help us out with the do's and don'ts of building your RB engine. That way we can all learn a little bit from his experience and his knowledge with the RB engine. Well, Andrew's made it down to Haltech HQ here and he's bought us a bit of a surprise. So Andrew, thanks so much for turning up. And first things first, tell me about this. This is awesome.
Well, I've been doing a lot of block research and development with Platinum Racing products, as people have probably seen on our YouTube channel. And obviously, the more research you do, you need to know more things. So Herman had this cut up so we could actually analyse the inside of RB blocks to obviously help, well, make them better.
So what is this thing? This is an RB block. What's it out of?
This is an 05U, so it's just a R32, R33, R34 GTR. Not sure exactly which one it came out of because we obviously got it from a wrecker. But it's just a normal base level RB26, not one of the improved ones.
Right. This would have given us so much information. I suppose because there's so many myths and so much internet magic surrounding this such a special type of engine. So cutting it up, you would have learned so much stuff, but I suppose before we get to that, we should probably first this is obviously like the top end stuff. So let's talk about say a GTR that we want to make 400, 450, 500 kilowatts. Tell us a little bit about what you would need to make that sort of power.
If you're just talking about the engine itself, obviously support gear is support gear to do it right. Just the engine itself, we found with all of our development and cross-referenced with lots of workshops, as soon as you want to go past 400 kilowatts at all four wheels, head gasket and head studs become a problem. The factory gasket doesn't seal and the head studs don't hold. And then you're pretty right with factory internals, honestly, until, look, I'm going to say 500 kilowatts, even though I've gone quite beyond that and so have some other guys on stock bottom ends. Realistically, I say 450, 500 kilowatts is when you need to start thinking about a lot more things.
Right, and in that, I'm sure there's no harm in it. If you really did, like if you're making 450, 500, like just for safety's sake, would you think, oh, it might be worth changing some parts, or don't worry about it?
I had completely standard from the gasket down, untouched, except for it had a baffle on the sump and an accumulator, just as a little bit of a precaution for more oil surge as opposed to a mechanical failure. The pump was fine, rods were fine all the way through to, you know, well over 700 horsepower at the wheels. So the myth that rods break at 500-600 horsepower is rubbish. If tuned well, driven properly, stock rods, stock pistons had no problems all the way to nearly 800 wheel horsepower.
Wow, that's a huge amount of power. Look, we're probably, the stock block stuff, mate, killing it.
I wouldn't recommend it to everyone though.
For me personally, I always like to have that little bit of insurance where I don't mind throwing a bit of money at a set of rods and a set of pistons. Right. Very particularly a set of rods, but while you're there, a set of pistons, that way, because if you do have one of those unfortunate failures, to have a rod come through and clean up your RB block, depending on what country you are, that could be catastrophic. So a bit of insurance in rods and pistons probably can't hurt. But
there's the age for scenario as well. Some of them are just getting old as well. That's another big problem that we don't always factor in, is just age.
So now that we've talked about the I'm going to say stock bottom end, or the stock with a slight service bottom end, if we were planning on going 500 kilowatts onwards, like you guys have done so much development and you've obviously seen what's really going on with these things, can you tell us a little bit about, give us some of the common problems that we are going to see when we start trying to make over 500 kilowatts?
Well, these problems are obviously known, but there's a lot of myth and sort of misinformation surrounding them as well. Firstly, you've got the block itself is a problem, cracking on the outside and cracking of bores. The oil pump itself is a problem. And then the other one that we have to look at is actually just oil control. So that's sort of a separate issue to mechanically with the pump. You've got to control the oil in an RB.
Right, okay, well, while this thing's open, where the cracking, I suppose, we'll start with block cracking. Where does a block crack?
Okay, the most common place, and I'm not saying it's the only place, when you have a crack on the outside, it is right here in the middle, between cylinder 3 and 4, above that oil feed, they crack. And essentially that happens because a block twists, and if you can imagine grabbing a block and twisting it, where's it going to break? In the middle. And the other thing is GTRs have a sump that has a diff in it. So the diff and sump are all in one. So essentially you have a front diff attached to the block. That creates more twisting force. So you do find that a two-wheel drive 26 doesn't crack as easily as a four-wheel drive 26.
Yeah, right.
And you'll also find a car used for circuit racing may not crack a block, while one used for drag racing, way more likely. So if you look inside here as well, you can actually see how thin the material is, where that head stud goes down between 3 and 4, and where that the oil feed is. It's actually really quite thin in the block. So we actually had that as a theory. We thought potentially it's quite thin. Then when we cut it open, it's thin. Now, cracking of the bores is a totally different thing altogether. So all the testing we've done with platinum, we've shown that these blocks actually suffer from a lot of core shift. And essentially what happens when they cast the block, the bores move around a little bit. So you actually have different size thickness to the bores, and you can get an RB26 that has a great bore where it's sort of 3.5 to 4 mil between the cylinders down the whole bore. But then you get another one that has, say, 5 mil on this side and 2.5 mil on this side. So if you have a thin bore, anything under 3, turn the power up, split a bore.
And when you talk about this core shift, can you tell me, like looking at the top, I suppose, of one of these, what's the core that you're talking about that's moving around?
It's actually the entire bore itself. It's not just like, because these obviously don't need a sleeve, they're a cast iron block. The entire actual bore itself moves around within the block. Generally, it's actually front to back. We find that the actual wall thickness on the cylinder, sort of each side, the thrust side and the opposing side, they're fine. The problem is always between cylinders, and that's where it happens. And it's actually usually slightly off. It's actually about sort of 20 degrees off from the centre. There's actually usually a thin spot that's there naturally. Combine that with core shift, and you'll always find every single time we've tested a block that split a bore, we've measured it, thin bore.
Yeah, right.
So you have to basically measure it before you build it. And that's what people don't do. I've actually been shocked how many workshops don't actually do a sonic test, measure the bore thickness before they build it. But we're finding now that more and more people are doing it, and yeah, that can be the key between breaking and not breaking.
The next part, myths or magic, oil pumps. What's the story? The oil pumps, there's different size oil pumps. Why do they break? How do they break? How do you stop them breaking?
Well, there's two types of pumps, short nose and long nose crank. Short nose was everything, I think, till August 91. In R32 was a short nose crank, August 91 onwards. So late model 32s have a long nose crank. And basically on the front of the crank, what drives the pump is either small or big. Small is bad, big is good.
Okay, so more drive surface on the later model engines.
Yeah, so on the early ones, they actually broke just from almost just looking at them. They really are that bad, the early model ones, but they actually developed the reputation for the late model ones. When they improved it, it's actually not that bad. Like I said, we've had a stock bottom end, make nearly 800 horsepower at the tyres and do 6 years of work, but you have to drive around the problem. Essentially, it's shock loading. So anything that puts a shock load on that pump causes it to basically, you can imagine shock loading, it's moving back and forward on that drive, and that just makes them crack and break. So rev limiter, two-step, clutch kicks, launch control, anything that just puts huge shock loading onto the engine is what breaks it. So I had to drive around that for 6 years, so no rev limiter, very gentle on the clutch, I didn't use two-step or flat shift. I had to drive around the problem to stop it from breaking.
What about the oil flow from that? So the two separate parts,
two
pump,
separate.
And then there's a lot of breather torque and a lot of oil drain torque and all of that stuff. What's going on there? Why is this a myth, or what's the area? What's the problem?
Okay, so when you have a factory pump and factory flow, a factory sump kind of holds enough oil for it. And you can find that just having a baffle in the factory sump and having, rocker cover breathers is probably enough to control a GDR. Maybe not a circuit one, that gets a bit more complicated. But what happens is you upgrade your pump, it's not just stronger, it's got more flow. And why they got more flow? Well, RBs love oil pressure in the bearings to stay alive. So if you have more flow, what does it do to the sump? It empties the sump quicker. You cannot upgrade to an aftermarket oil pump that has more flow without upgrading your sump. You have to put a larger sump on. And obviously now you've got a larger sump, you've got more flow, and you've got probably some of the worst oil control of a factory engine in an RB26. You've got to actually stop it going to the head. So you have to put restrictors into the block to stop oil flow to the head. That helps keep it out of the head, keeps it hopefully in the block more. You have to put a head drain or a head breather, depending on what your attitude of how that works is a pretty important upgrade. You've got to have breathers in the rocker cover, and you've got to have a massive catch can when you're on an 85, because you'll fill it up. No matter how good the engine is on an RB, you're going to fill it up. You've got to keep that oil down in the bottom, you've got to keep it on the bearing.
What are the things that you're most nervous about when you take out a monster GDR?
From working with Platinum and doing all this sort of testing, I think that measuring the block first is, to me now, is probably the most important thing. You've got to measure bore thickness and you've got to measure the hardness of the block before you build it. If it's not acceptable, just get another block and start again. So make sure you measure your block for hardness and bore thickness more than anything else. And the next thing to do is make sure the way to increase the strength of the block is just with a brace. So if you put an engine brace on these things, it massively increases the strength of the block, stops the twisting, stops the crack on the outside, even helps with the bores not splitting as easily. Just that little bit of preparation to the block is going to mean huge dividends later on when you're pushing it. Why crack a block on the outside at 500 kilowatts when you're building a 900 kilowatt engine is going to be pretty annoying.
Well, Andrew, thanks so much for coming down today and showing us through all this stuff and sharing so much of the knowledge and experience that it would be very rare to get this sort of insight before you start your adventure trying to build an RB. But before you go, this thing you've been hiding, just show me what is it?
Look at this. So we've already spoken about putting a brace on. Obviously, 26s have the main cap and girdle is all integrated, so you kind of pull them all off together. And then you would have the brace separate. Other people have developed independent main caps and tried to join them together. But this from Platinum is the new big kahuna. This is main caps, girdle, and a brace all integrated to one. This thing is designed to handle whatever, like just throw it at it, it'll take it. I reckon we could, it'll stop main cap walk, which is obviously a problem once you go past 4 digits. It's going to stop block twist. I reckon we could put this back together with it.
Let's not try that, but man, this is making like that torsional, that twisting a thing of the past. So this one piece, put it together, tunnel bore, just
everything. 30 years of RB26 and we're still making stuff for them.
What sort of weight is in this thing? Like what is it and what parts does it replace on the RB?
Well, it's I think 22 kilos for this steel billet version. And it replaces obviously the factory main cap and sort of girdle that's all in one, because it's all one piece in an RB. So it replaces that. And if you were building a big engine that had a brace in it, you're effectively replacing the brace, the main cap, girdle, all in one with this.
I'm all for the insurance because I know that I'm keen on it, that all that money in machining and all of that stuff, like, yes, I'm sure this is overkill for what I would class as a 400 or 500 kilowatt street car. But in saying that, you've got so much money invested in it that having something like this, you may as
overkill.
well.
Why not? If you can go overkill, if you can afford to go overkill, do it.
So, should you get an RB? The answer is most certainly yes. This is one of, if not the most famous Japanese muscle engine of all time. They look right at home in a wide range of chassis like the Silvias and Skylines. But you're like me and interested in the rusty stuff, they look pretty good in a Datsun manufactured GDR. Admittedly, these are getting to the stage where they're probably best left as a collector car and you're better off finding a 240Z or 260Z to start with. Which variant should you use? Well, it all depends on what you can get your hands on and what you're going to do with it. RB20, RB25, RB26, RB30 are all available somewhere and each of them sound amazing. There's huge aftermarket support for the RB series, and with most parts available off the shelf, things like cranks, rods, pistons, camshafts, stud kits, gaskets, they're normally just a click away. All you have to decide is whether you want 1 cam or 2, 1 throttle or 6, 2 litre, 2.5, 2.6, 3 litre or a stroker kit that might be 3.4 litre. Whether you want to gear it towards a smaller spoolie street turbo or a giant dyno killing monster, all that stuff's up to you. And I think the beauty of the RB is so many uses and so many choices really do make this one of the great ultimate all-rounders. We'll be looking at Ford's Barra engine to see why it's becoming one of the most popular swaps around. You've probably been seeing quite a lot about Ford's straight 6 Barra engine recently. There's a good reason for that. It's now one of the most popular engine swaps in Australia, and there's a growing interest in these engines in the United States. Today, we're going to investigate what all the fuss is about and why everyone is making so much noise about this particular engine. First, a little history. The Barra 6 is an Australian-made inline 6-cylinder engine that was manufactured between 2002 to 2016 in the south of Australia in Victoria. It's named after a fish, but being built in Australia, its namesake is the Australian barramundi, not the barracuda as it's often thought. While the Barra can trace its roots right back to the 2.4 litre, 114 cubic inch Thrift Power 6, which powered the 1959 North American Ford Falcon Compact, that's where any relationship with the American engine ends. From that time on, all development was carried out in Geelong, Victoria, through the crossflow motor of the 80s and the Intech engine found in the now infamous AU Ford Falcon, to the Barra that we're talking about today. Available in both naturally aspirated and turbocharged configurations, the Barra was the go-to engine for the locally built Ford Falcon in all the body styles, from the sedan through to the wagons and the extremely Australian Aussie Ute. It also powered the Ford Territory SUV, and a factory LPG or propane burning variation was the mainstay of the Australian taxis for many, many years. Factory outputs varied from 156 kilowatts or 209 horsepower in the LPG taxi form to 325 kilowatts or 436 horsepower in the ultimate incarnation of the engine, the limited edition FGX XR6 Turbo Sprint variant, which also had an overboost feature that increased power to 370 kilowatts for up to 10 seconds at a time. Okay, so let's take a look at the engine itself. With a capacity of 4 litres, the Barra can definitely be defined as a big 6. And despite its long history, it's actually a thoroughly modern engine, featuring double overhead cams, 4 valves per cylinder, and truly variable cam control on both the intake and the exhaust. The Barra is a big, long, tall, and heavy engine, which may seem less than ideal for a motorsport engine. But it's the Barra's robustness that actually makes it ideal for bulk power, especially when boost is brought into the equation. In particular, the later models are strong and ideal for a huge turbo upgrade. Indeed, with basic supporting mods such as replacing the plastic intake with a stronger metal item, valve springs, head studs, and an aftermarket oil pump gear, they've been seen to make an easy 600 rear wheel horsepower on a stock bottom end. This thing, 600 horsepower, factory bottom end. In fact, that's exactly the power that the mighty car mod's Cresta made with a stock bottom end when it ran a 9.9 at nearly 140 mile an hour over the quarter mile. One of the Barra's main attractions is its ability to make torque. They pull nice and hard from low down in the rev range, with the turbocharged variants creating as much as 425 foot-pounds from just 2,600 RPM. Another factor that makes these units so popular is that, like all straight 6 engines, it's very well balanced. The pistons move in tandem with their mirror image on the other side of the block, meaning that the reciprocating forces balance out nicely without the need for balance shafts or counterweights. With a built bottom end, 1,000 horsepower at the rear wheels isn't too big of an ask from the motor. And believe it or not, the engine in the Dynamite Performance Barra-powered drag car makes over 2,000 horsepower, spins over 10,000 RPM, and still uses the factory block and factory cylinder head. Now to the things I love about this engine. First of all, they're very cheap. They're readily accessible in Australia and New Zealand. There's plenty of spares available for them. They're super strong, they're super reliable, they're incredibly torquey. They absolutely love the boost. And as an engine package coming out of a factory car, the exhaust manifolds, the way the turbocharger sits,
It's such a nice looking package straight out of the box that you really don't have to do a lot to make it look good and to make it perform. The bad points about the mighty Barra, it is very long, it is very tall. Aftermarket components, while they are somewhat available in Australia, there's never going to be the development that the RB or the 2J has had, simply because this thing's not available worldwide. So while there are a lot of these units in Australia, aftermarket blocks, camshafts, just off-the-shelf exhaust manifolds, they're not going to be as common, and there's not going to be as much competition as there is in the 2J or the RB world. Mainly, and what I've already just said, not available in any country other than Australia or New Zealand. That does make it a little bit difficult for the rest of the world to get a taste of the mighty Barra. Well, that's it for today, but before you go, jump down to the comments and tell us what kind of engine you'd like us to take a closer look at next time. As always, thanks very much for watching.
Well, my name's Scott. Catch you next time.